Welcome to Bigger Than Rooted and Real, the space where we don't sugarcoat life, we speak truth with love and stand on unshakable faith. With your host, Charlease Hatchett, cancer warrior, encourager, accountability partner, and the woman you call when you need to hear it straight but still feel seen. This podcast is where we talk about what's really going on healing, identity, relationships, purpose, faith, and walking tall through every fire life throws your way. Because life, it gets loud, but God is bigger. And here, we stay rooted, we stay real, and we grow through all of it. Let's get into it.
Welcome to God is Rooted and Real, where we speak truth and we are real when it comes to discussions and conversations. This is where testimonies rise from the ashes and healing speaks louder than hurt. Today's guest is not just a voice of strength, he's a soul forged in fire. Lieutenant Colonel retired George Matthews is a proud native of Sunrise Hills in Chesapeake, Virginia. He's a Braves for Life, Indian River High School, class of 1983, graduate of West Point, class of 1987, and a 24-year Army infantry officer with deployments to Iraq and Operation Just Cause in Panama. But his greatest battles weren't fought overseas. They were waged in hospital rooms, silent nights of prayers, and graveside moments that shattered his heart. Between 2014 and 2015, George lost his mother, father, and mother-in-law. 11 years ago, he was diagnosed with throat cancer, and last summer, he laid his only son to rest. And yet, he still trusts God because grief is real, but faith, hope, and love are more real. Please welcome my friend and fellow soldier in the faith, George Matthews.
Charlease, how you doing?
I'm good. So, George, I'm just going to ask you a couple of quick questions, and then I'm going to jump into your story about your son, Caleb.
Okay.
But before we enter the weighty chapters, we're going to anchor our roots. We grew up in Sunrise Hills, and it taught us about identity, resilience, and legacy. And not only that, we talked a little earlier about the loss. There were grave losses. We were exposed to loss at an early age,
Yes.
And I know for me personally, my dad died when I was 11, and he was one among 5 or 6 Navy men that lived in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
That they all were friends. They all hung out together and they all died a couple years apart, which left a lot of widows in our neighborhood. So for me personally, I know that in itself kind of exposed me to funerals and loss and dealing with all of that at a young age. And I know you had shared earlier, I know in your particular court in Sunrise Hills and around the corner, name a couple of the people that died when we were in junior high school.
So we were out of high school when Deneen Fitzgerald passed. I believe I was at West Point, but I don't think she was 20. She was 19 years old, 19, 20 years old, young. And we remained close to the Fitzgeralds my entire life. Miss Fitzgerald passed away. But you talk about widowers, it's a whole nother level when it's parents burying children. A couple of houses from Deneen Fitzgerald, Kim McCoy, around the corner from Kim, Laurie Hawkins. I knew those girls. You knew those girls.
Yep.
We went to school with them. Though he was an adult with his own kids, I used to play with Juniesco Brown, and as an adult, but still leaving a mother to grieve. And of all things, he was playing football in the court or in the street like we used to as little boys. And I think he hit his head up against a car. They take him
Mm.
home. He never wakes up. He dies, brain hemorrhage. Um, so these are people that we knew, we grew up with. Um, and so death was very real. But the idea that parents, not a wife or a husband burying their spouse, because my aunt, two doors from me on the other side, buried her husband and young. And he had a brain tumor. Um, and I remember very vividly the movie about Brian Piccolo, Brian's song with Billy D playing Gail Sayers. Was out when we were going to the hospital to watch my uncle Freeman pass away. So death was real in Sunrise Hills, and it was like it was hitting every household in the
Yeah.
vicinity of where I lived. So we shared that earlier only to couch the fact that God was preparing me to be one of those parents to bury a child and have to continue to live with grief, but with something to know, hey, Satan has to ask permission. And we refer to the book of Job. And
Hmm.
sometimes it's God that says, have you considered my servant X? And take a Laurie Hawkins from a parent, or a Kim McCoy from a parent, or a Deneen Fitzgerald from a parent. So um, we were acquainted with it early. And I think I shared earlier that in all of my military assignments, even, and some people that Caleb knew and was friends with, we experienced seeing a family deal with the death of a child. So,
So that leads me to last summer. And
yes,
you mentioned Caleb. So Caleb was your only son, right?
only son,
And
IVF miracle.
knowing that any parent losing a child, but that's the worst nightmare for a parent. The
Mhm.
loss of your only child, your only son, that kind of grief just rewrites your soul. So, can you share with us what happened with Caleb, how he transitioned last summer? And I'm thankful to you that God has strengthened you enough to be able to talk about this a year later.
All right. So, July the 2nd, he's hit by a car about a mile and a half from the house. He's walking. It's really dark. It's after midnight. And it's really dark. And um, in our community, there's a lot of deer that go in the neighborhood. And um, I thought maybe a deer spooked him or something. He ran into the street and he's hit. Either way, he's hit. And on the 3rd, um, they ask us if we're going to honor the fact that he was a donor. We talked about that earlier, Charlease. So, um, thing that made it make sense, and I think the reason we're calling back now is to just get this idea of God preparing us for that 20 years earlier when we are in California. Caleb's 9 years old. We live in a cul-de-sac and most ethnically diverse neighborhood I've ever lived in. We had a family from Mexico. We had a family that was African American, looked like the Cosby Show. Had a family that was a Korean married to a Japanese. We had a family from Pakistan. We had a family from India. But in this cul-de-sac that we lived in, there was a Caucasian family, and the parents were Marines, the McDougalls, Carrie and Elizabeth McDougal, and their 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. Jennifer, at 21, is asked to leave the home. I guess that's the summer of 2003. Um, and so she's hit by a car head on, all of her belongings in the car. Um, she was having men in the home, and the parents weren't for that. Anyway, she's killed. 90 days later, Daniel is murdered in the home by some gang members that heard about the parents being Marines and having um, lots of guns and ammo in the home. So they
Mm,
tried to get Daniel to open up the safe, which he couldn't, and so they shot him right in the home,
mm.
found by his father. Um, the father last summer is on his way from. He moved from California to Nevada,
Okay.
loses two kids, wife dies of cancer. He
Mm.
remarries. The woman he marries has four kids, and she lost two of her kids. So they
Wow.
understand the grief of a parent that I'm experiencing for me now. And it's not just people that I knew. Like I said, every assignment I could name someone that buried a child or were the child of a parent that had to bury them. So here we are. And Carrie McDougal, who wanted to go by Mac only, thought Carrie was too feminine.
Right.
And Caleb was 9.
Okay.
And Caleb used to play with Daniel.
Mm-hmm.
We'd go over to the house. Caleb was 9, Daniel was 14. But, you know, Daniel took care of all the kids in the neighborhood. Um, Another kid in that neighborhood, by the way, car accident. Caleb used to play with him and dies himself. So
Okay.
here we are. Carrie sees on Facebook that Caleb's service is going to happen. And he goes, he hits me immediately up. He says, look, I'm in Texas. I'm in Amarillo on my way to Pennsylvania to see the Little League World Series. I've been doing that therapeutically since Daniel died. I can be in your house in 5 hours. He comes
Wow.
to the repass and he shared with me what I needed to hear when I needed to hear it. And it is a part of Romans 8:28 and Job being so real to me in that at 9 years old, Caleb used to go to his house. He shares this. He said, I never told you this, but it's been 20 years and it's time to tell you now. So Caleb would knock on the door, says, Daniel home?
Mm-hmm.
He would say, Mr. Mack, is Daniel home? And he would say,
Mm-hmm.
Caleb, I told you it's not Mr. Mack, it's just Mack. He
Right.
said, he would come back, Mr. Mack, is Daniel home? Sometimes Daniel would be home. He would say, yes, he's home. But Caleb, it's just Mac. So he said
Mm-hmm.
he got tired of it. And maybe a month or so before Daniel was killed, he goes, Christ, Caleb, it's just Mac. And he said,
Right.
Caleb's eyes got this big, like silver dollars. He goes, Mac, you can't use Christ's name in vain. He said, because Christ cares. See, Christ cares. And H, because he cares, we can have hope. And R, because we have hope, no matter what, we can rejoice. And when we rejoice, no matter what, someone will see it and be inspired. He said, if you inspire someone, you're going to get a chance to share Jesus Christ with them. He said,
Wow.
and then you can teach them about Jesus Christ. Now I'm hearing that for the first time. This is the repass. We haven't done the burial
Right.
because the burial had to be scheduled the day following the service. So um, we had the celebration of life. We're eating at the church. He is in the back room with the family, and he shares that. And man, it brought comfort. And what he said was, I never told you that, but it was 20 years ago. And some of those men are coming up on, he didn't call them men, by the way. He said they're
Good.
coming up on parole and
Oh,
uh, and I got to deal with it. Maybe they get out. My son's been gone 20 years. Maybe they're going to get out on parole. He said,
mm,
and what Caleb told me as a 9-year-old boy to this day holds true. So though Caleb, 29 and a half, will not see 30, won't get to
right.
share that with children. Gail and I won't have grandchildren, but we have an enduring story from 20 years prior in another man's grief that he's held 20 years. And by no coincidence, he's in the state of Texas, big state. Got it. But Nevada, going to Pennsylvania, and you stop in Texas and you say, I will be there to celebrate and honor your boy.
Right.
That's God. That is Romans 8:28 at levels that we cannot fathom, that we cannot explain, but that we embrace and enjoy and rejoice in with absolute full faith, full hope, because we know Christ cares, particularly when it's grief of the level of not a spouse and a spouse, not a child and their parent like you since the age of 11. And you will never get over the years without your dad,
Right.
but a dad and a mom can never get over the years without a child.
Right.
Everyone will say it shouldn't happen this way. Well, whether it should or shouldn't, Job had 10, he lost 10. I had one,
Right.
I lose one. Carrie had 4, he loses 2.
Mm.
The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So I'll
And
leave that.
that verse that you were talking about, Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things,
Yes,
God works for the good for those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose.
absolutely.
And we, a lot of times, we go through things, we go through trials, we go through illness, we go through tribulations, and everybody has a story to share. And
Yep,
I so appreciate the fact that you're sharing this, because this kind of grief can rewrite your soul, and it can take you closer to God, or it can pull you further away from God. It can break up your family. It can be divorce. You name it.
oh, absolutely.
Any and everything can happen in a relationship when
Yep,
parents lose their son or daughter.
absolutely.
And I know Psalm 34:18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. You know, it's saying the Lord is close. He knows that you're crushed in spirit, but he saves you in the midst of all of that pain. Blessed are
Absolutely.
those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Matthew 5:4. A lot of people don't get the blessed part of those who mourn. They just latch on to, I'm mourning, I can't let this grief go, you know. And you
Right.
said that grief is real, but faith,
Grief is real,
hope, and love are more real. And
more
so
real.
that's not just a quote. It's spiritual warfare.
Yep,
And I appreciate you as a man, you as a male. Number one, knowing your salvation date, knowing what led you to the Lord, being able to publicly proclaim it and stand on it and share it. You're a huge example, not only in walking through the loss of your son, but professing your faith and letting people know that your faith is what anchors you. And not only that, you have truly walked and clung to the book of Job like it's armor, because you understand um, what what took place in that story, where a lot of people may not get that and may not understand that. I know Job 19:26, the verse is, and after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my
yep.
flesh I will see God.
I will see him. I'm going to see him. And that means I'm going to see Caleb too. That means everybody that I shared Christ with and that he shared Christ with, that truly received Christ, we're going to see him. And then What Job never found out, that this was spiritual warfare, that Satan was asking permission. And
Yep.
then the whole thing started with God suggesting, have thou considered my servant Job? And so for everybody that watches this, that's already been through grief, or the people that don't even know the grief that's going to be appointed their way for their good and God's glory, though he slay me, yet I will trust him. God is working together everything for our good and his glory. Job didn't know that God said, have you considered my servant Job? So that could be, have you considered my servant Charlease? Considered my
Yep.
servant Abigail, my wife? Have you considered, you put the name in, because people that watch this, they could have their name in the portals of heaven offered to Satan by God, who's going to take care of them, who's going to comfort them, and who's going to work it together for their good and his glory. Period. Christ cares. So have hope and rejoice and inspire and share and teach. That's Caleb, and I love it. So thanks, Charlease.
I appreciate. Well, this is what I do know is when we talk about God and we talk about our testimony and we share our testimony, we don't go through what we go through just for us. We go
Right,
through what we go through for other people.
right.
It's a good thing that you're able to share uh, your point and your reference when it comes to grief and dealing with your son. Um, so, what glimpse, what thought, what reflection would you want people to rest in um, in knowing that your story can be a refuge for other people to come to when they're in the midst of dealing? Because I often have people who come to me with cancer scenarios and I refer them to other people, like I did with you with my mail carrier when she came down with throat cancer, knowing that you had throat cancer. What encouragement would you just give me 2 points of encouragement real quick that you would give to people?
Give them Romans chapter 8, because if you don't give them the word, you didn't help them at all. We can give them stories. Great. I would give them Romans chapter 8. I would give them the entire book of Job. And then I would say this. Yeah, the word is one thing, but prayer is the other. And that's what you learn from Job.
Right.
So we talked about Indian River for Life, Sunrise Hill forever. We have friends from high school that, like you, I had not seen in ages, and we grew up together. We saw each other every day for several years, maybe not every day, but every school day for
Mm-hmm.
several years. We would at least see each other.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in my cancer journey, you showed up at just the right time. Alice Moby jumped out of the elevator at just the right time. These are high school people. In Job, he had three friends, and it says God turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends. So when you're the one grieving, or when you're the one with cancer, find the person that you need to pray for that's a friend that you might not have seen, and know that by praying for them, whatever they're dealing with that you don't know about, you bless them, because God is working it all together for their good and his glory and
Right.
your good and his glory. So pray. The word and prayer works, and it is the only thing that will comfort. You got to have the word, you got to have friends, and you got to pray.
Well, George, I just thank you so much. Your life echoes Job, not just the suffering, but suffering part of that book, which you recommend for people to read, but the steadfast faith. And that's the reason God said, Satan, have you considered my son Job?
That's
Because he
right.
knew his level of faith.
He knew the level.
And so
Job didn't
in
know the level.
right, right. But in this podcast right here, Rooted and Real, what we're not going to do is let grief have the final word. What we're not going to do is hush the power of our testimony, because what we're going to do is worship in the rubble, trust him still, and carry hope like soldiers of grace. So, friend, I want to thank you for standing tall so others can rise. And I want to leave you with this prayer. Still I trust, oh God, who reigns even in the ruins. We come before you with hearts tender and trembling, lifting up George Matthews and his family who have walked through fire and still declare your faithfulness. Though the weight of grief has pressed hard, they have not been crushed. Though sorrow has knocked at every life, every door, they have not turned away from yours. Father, like Job, George has declared, though you slay me, yet I will trust in you. Lord, honor that trust, breathe peace into the cracks that loss has carved. Wrap your presence around the memories too sacred for words. Let your spirit be their comforter, counselor, and strength. Let hope rise like morning light, unshaken and undeniable. Cover George's family with divine protection, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and to surround them with people who speak life and stand in the gap and reflect your love. And may his testimony continue to carry healing to those still in the valley. You are the God of resurrection. You are the God of restoration. You are the God who proves again and again that you are bigger than every grave. We speak trust, we speak peace, we speak legacy. In Jesus' name, in his mighty name, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you,
God bless.
George.
No
I
doubt.
appreciate you. God bless.
Appreciate you. God bless.